Hi, and welcome to some key concepts and ideas for ethics. This is for OLCU601, Democracy, Ethics, and Leadership. We'll spend a few moments reviewing some key ideas regarding ethics that will help you through the course. You may find that you've been exposed to some of these ideas before, maybe you forgot them, so we're here to remind you. We'll take a glimpse into how to think when working in the realm of ethical deliberation. We'll differentiate between dilemmas and character issues. And we'll finish up with a brief discussion on ethics versus the law or policy. This topic of ethics is huge. Many people spend many days thinking on what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. So our goal here is to take some of these lofty ideas, pull in a couple into the daily life for you in your organizations. There are many perspectives on how to figure out what is right and what is wrong in a given situation. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them can fit nicely into these two ideas or theories about determining the moral right or wrongness of action: a teleological perspective or a deontological perspective. Each of these theories or these perspectives are considerations on how to find out whether something is right or wrong. So, taking a look at the teleological ideas, we see a word consequentialism. The word itself starts to explain what this perspective will consider in order to determine the rightness and wrongness of an action. A consequentialist finds morality of a decision in the outcomes of that decision. In other words, according to this perspective, one cannot know the rightness or the goodness of a decision without considering or knowing the results. So if you are a consequentialist in your perspective and someone comes and asks you your opinion on whether or not what they did was good or bad, correct or wrong, you'll probably find yourself wondering what happened on the other side of that decision. You may even ask, what was the outcome? Deontological deals with the arena of categorical imperatives. A deontological perspective on action and ethics accepts that rightness is located in each action. So each step or action is measured as right or wrong, irrespective of the outcome, the consequence, or the environment in which those decisions or actions were made. Words associated with this perspective include virtue, duty, obligation, the right way, and action. Most of us reside somewhere in the center. Most of us understand that a particular action can be understood to be wrong. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Most of us also can consider and understand that sometimes you don't know, that you actually have to wait to see, well, what became of the situation in order to determine whether or not the person did something good or did something bad. Very few of us reside in one or the other, at least when we start to think about it and we deliberate on ourselves. The thing to remember is that everyone has a perspective, and each perspective will frame the perception and the definition of an issue or a question. Each perspective also impacts the deliberation process. And sometimes, depending on the perspective, you can have the same facts and get dichotomous outcomes and conclusions. This course is not necessarily a personal course, but through the reading and through the consideration of your own framework, and we all have one, you're going to be asked to consider the concepts of moral universalism and relativism. When we talk about ethics and how to come to conclusions, the term we should be using is deliberation. Now, most of us have ideas of right and wrong, and we tend to make decisions about the right and wrongness of something, whether it's someone else's action or our own, pretty quickly. And for daily reasons, that serves us fairly well. But when we are in charge, when you are a leader, when you're a manager, when you're a supervisor, or your decisions affect or impact many people, you do owe some time to the people who are going to feel the consequences of your decision. You owe them some deliberation. So in ethics, we talk about deliberating. It's an action word. It's not passive, which means it's intentional. And what we're doing is simply to think. We are weighing, we are thinking, we are considering as much of the situation as we can comprehend. We are looking at it in whole, the totality of the circumstances. For Wall, deliberation occurs using moral reasoning. We all have moral reasoning. Another way to consider this is an internal framework by which you are making determinations about rightness and wrongness. Moral reasoning is understood to be a set of instructions or steps that result in the application of the abstract, those teleological and deontological ideas that we talked about earlier, and some of the virtues, to the concrete, discrete cases. These are the things that make it to your desk on a daily basis. Deliberation is not haphazard. It is not shooting from the hip. It is not going on your gut reaction. It does require time. It is intentional. It occurs predominantly in the mind. It relies on the past, so you may be doing an investigation of sorts, but it does not assume. It has to be fact-based. And one of its goals is to weed out assumptions, presumptions, and preconceptions, even your own, or maybe especially your own. And it is circumspect in nature. It is also anchored. It may be anchored to policy and procedures of your organization. It may be anchored to socially accepted ideas of right and wrong. But very important for you as the leader to consider is that it's anchored to your perspective, whether we like it or not. Let's talk about the differences between ethical dilemma and ethical lapse in integrity issues. Later on in the course, you will be asked to write a paper, and you're asked to consider an issue where you are looking at an ethical dilemma. It is very common that students will miss the mark by writing a paper on an ethical lapse or an integrity issue. They are related, but they are two different things. A true ethical dilemma is a situation which brings two values that are both perceived or deemed as good against each other. So both values are good, but one will be violated to affirm or protect the other. For instance, protecting life and truth-telling. If these two things come up against each other, you have an ethical dilemma. The thing about ethics is we get to play in these issues, these very broad or sometimes outlandish issues that will likely never occur, but we talk about these thought experiments to demonstrate or to think about or come to some points. Assume you believe that human life is important and therefore should not be taken. Assume also that you believe that telling a lie is bad, so truth-telling is a value. Assume your neighbor is your friend and you know your friend. Now assume a man comes to your door asking if you know the time that your neighbor will arrive because he wishes to kill your neighbor. It's an absurd scenario, but assume these questions. What do you do? Do you lie, thereby breaking the truth-telling value, or do you tell him, thereby breaking the protection of life value? This is an example of a true ethical dilemma. Now, an ethical lapse or an integrity issue is a different thing. Assume we know that it is not only against the law to take property or money, but it also is morally, ethically bad, wrong. It's not okay. A person bound by the above assumptions is assigned to guard a very large sum of money. They're alone in a room. The money has not yet been counted. There are no cameras, and the person can reasonably know that people are gone for about an hour. Imagine the person has this thought. What do I do? What a dilemma. I can grab $23,000 and nobody will know. And I can use the money right now. I've got vacation to pay for. Even though the person is asking, what do I do? They may even in their mind declare it a dilemma. This is not an ethical dilemma, but it's a situation of potential ethical lapse. The right thing to do is known. to not take the money. The conflict is within the person, having to do with their integrity. Ethics and law, related, but they are not synonymous. There's a temptation and sometimes a simplicity to think that they function exactly the same, but there is a differentiation. Even the briefest review of human affairs will demonstrate that they are not the same. Laws are government policies that may or may not be resonant with ethical right or wrong. Slavery is a classic example. It was permitted and even encouraged by some laws. Yet we know it was an unethical, and it is an unethical practice. So a person can refrain from law breaking and yet be found in ethical error. Law in and of itself is insufficient to dictate what is ethical and what is not. Now for organizations, you can replace the term law with policy. So remember, there are many perspectives on how to determine what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. Many of those perspectives will nicely fit either as a teleological theory or a deontological theory. Most of us are somewhere in the middle, acknowledging that things are not always as clean as we would like or as we think. The thing to remember is you do have a perspective. It will impact how you perceive and define an issue. It also impacts how you will think or deliberate about that issue. The goal of this course is to get you to familiarize yourself with some of these assumptions that have just been inside. We hope to bring them to the surface and then demonstrate what it means to deliberate in ethical issues, not just for yourself, but for your organizations, for your teams, for your family, for your groups.